The dust had barely settled on Clara Ashford's 30th birthday when she realized the entire town of Goldfield, Nevada, had stopped seeing her altogether, their eyes sliding past her weathered hands and faded calico dress, as if she were nothing more than another piece of furniture in the general store where she worked 6 days a week. It was August 1887, and the desert heat shimmered off the wooden storefronts like liquid glass. Clara stood behind the counter, carefully measuring out flour for Mrs. Henderson, a woman 5 years her junior who had already buried one husband and remarried another. Mrs. Henderson chatted about her children, her voice bright and careless, never once asking Clara about her own life because everyone knew Clara Ashford had no life to speak of. She lived in a tiny room above the store, spent her days weighing sugar and salt, and her evenings mending clothes by lamplight. She had been doing this for 12 years, ever since her father died and left her with nothing but debts and the reputation of being difficult. The bell above the door jangled, and Clara looked up from the flour sack to see a man she had never seen before. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of sage and shadow. His hat was dusty from travel, and he wore his gun belt low on his hips in the manner of someone who knew how to use it. He moved with a quiet economy of motion that suggested every gesture had purpose, nothing wasted. "Help you?" Clara asked, her voice neutral. She had learned long ago not to smile too readily at men. It gave them ideas, and when those ideas were inevitably disappointed by the reality of who she was, they became cruel. "Need supplies for the trail," he said, pulling a list from his pocket. His voice was low and rough, like wind across stone. "Beans, coffee, hardtack, bacon. Whatever you got that will keep." Clara nodded and began gathering items, aware of Mrs. Henderson's curious gaze shifting between them. The stranger watched Clara work with an attention that made her uncomfortably aware of her chapped hands and the way her hair had come loose from its pins. She was not pretty, had never been pretty. Her face was too angular, her mouth too wide, her body too thin from years of stretching meals too far. "You are new to Goldfield," Mrs. Henderson said to the stranger, her voice taking on that particular brightness women used when they were interested. "Passing through," he replied, but his eyes stayed on Clara. Mrs. Henderson tried again. "We do not get many visitors this time of year, too hot for most folks." "I do not mind the heat." He pulled coins from his pocket as Clara tallied his supplies. "Name is Nathan Doyle. I will be staying at the boarding house for a spell. Got some horses to break for the mining company." "Oh, a horse breaker," Mrs. Henderson practically cooed. "How exciting! You simply must come to the church social on Saturday. Everyone will want to meet you." Nathan Doyle's gaze flicked to Mrs. Henderson for the briefest moment, then returned to Clara. "Maybe. Depends on the work." Clara wrapped his supplies in brown paper and twine, her movements practiced and efficient. She did not engage in the chatter because she had learned that her participation was never truly wanted. She was there to serve, to be useful, not to be part of the conversation. When she named his total, Nathan counted out the exact amount plus an extra nickel. "For your trouble," he said. "There is no trouble," Clara replied, trying to hand the nickel back. "The price is what I said." "For the careful wrapping, then." He touched the brim of his hat to her, nodded at Mrs. Henderson, and walked out into the brutal sunlight. Mrs. Henderson wasted no time. "Well, he is certainly something to look at. I wonder if he is married. He did not wear a ring, did you notice? Though of course men doing rough work often do not. I should mention him to Abigail Preston. Her daughter Emma just turned 19 and is pretty as a picture." Clara returned to the flour sack without comment. She had heard variations of this conversation 1,000 times. Pretty Emma Preston, lovely Sarah Mitchell, charming widow Reynolds. Never difficult, too thin. 30-year-old Clara Ashford, who everyone had forgotten was even a woman with hopes of her own. That evening, as Clara swept the store's wooden floor, she found herself thinking about Nathan Doyle's eyes and the way he had looked at her, really looked at her, as if she were someone worth seeing. It was a dangerous thing to dwell on. She had made that mistake before, reading kindness as interest, politeness as affection, and the disappointment had cut deep. She finished her sweeping and climbed the narrow stairs to her room, where she ate a simple supper of bread and cheese and tried to lose herself in a book she had read 3 times already. The next day brought more of the same. Heat and dust and customers who treated Clara as if she were part of the store's fixtures. She restocked shelves, balanced the ledger, and listened to gossip about Nathan Doyle, who had apparently impressed the mining company's foreman with his skill. By noon, half the town's unmarried women had found excuses to walk past the corrals where he was working. Clara was measuring out sugar for old Mr. Jennings when Nathan appeared again. Mr. Jennings took his sugar and departed with a grunt, leaving Clara alone with the horse breaker. "Need something else?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Forgot to get salt yesterday," Nathan said, but the way he said it made Clara think he had not forgotten at all. She retrieved a bag of salt from the shelf and set it on the counter between them. "Anything else? You got a name?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. In 12 years, hardly anyone had bothered to ask her name. They all just called her Miss Ashford when they bothered to call her anything at all. "Clara Ashford, Clara." He said it like he was tasting the word. "You have lived here long?" "All my life." She named the price for the salt, hoping he would pay and leave before she did something foolish like let herself believe his interest meant anything. But Nathan did not seem in any hurry. He leaned against the counter, and Clara caught the scent of leather and sage and honest sweat. "Must know everything there is to know about Goldfield, then." "Not much to know. It is a mining town. People come looking for silver, stay if they find it, move on if they do not." "You planning to stay?" The question was impertinent, too personal for someone she had met only yesterday. Clara should have deflected it with a polite non-answer. Instead, she found herself saying, "I do not have anywhere else to go." Something flickered in Nathan's eyes, an understanding that made Clara's throat tight. He paid for the salt, and this time she made sure not to give him a chance to leave extra. "You going to that church social on Saturday?" he asked. "No." "Why not?" "Because no one wanted her there, not really." She was invited out of obligation, out of the town's need to pretend they were all Christian and charitable. But the moment she arrived, the conversations would shift away from her, the circles would close, leaving her standing alone by the lemonade table until she could leave without causing comment. "I have things to do," she said instead. Nathan studied her for a long moment. "Shame." "I was thinking I might go if I knew there would be someone worth talking to there." Before Clara could respond, the bell jangled and Abigail Preston swept in with her daughter Emma, a confection of blonde curls and pink muslin that made Clara feel even more drab by comparison. Abigail's eyes sharpened when she saw Nathan. "Mr. Doyle, what a pleasant surprise. We were just speaking about you this morning, were we not, Emma?" Emma blushed prettily, lowering her eyes in a way that suggested she had practiced the gesture in a mirror. "Mama, you are embarrassing me." "Nonsense, dear. Mr. Doyle, I wanted to personally invite you to our church social on Saturday. There will be music and dancing and the finest food in Goldfield. Emma here makes a peach pie that has won ribbons at the county fair." "That's so," Nathan said, his tone polite but flat. His body had shifted, Clara noticed, angling slightly away from the Prestons and toward her, as if they were allies in some unspoken understanding. "Indeed. You simply must come. A handsome young man like yourself should not spend all his time with horses. You need civilized company." Abigail's gaze flicked to Clara, dismissing her in that single glance. "Clara, dear, we need thread. The blue, you know the one." Clara knew. She retrieved it from the drawer, wrapped it, and accepted Abigail's money, all while the woman chattered at Nathan about the social and Emma's many accomplishments. Nathan listened with the patience of someone accustomed to dealing with skittish horses, offering nothing but the occasional nod. When the Prestons finally left, trailing promises that they would see him Saturday, Nathan turned back to Clara. "You sure about that social?" he asked. "Very sure," Clara said, her voice coming out harder than she intended. She did not want his pity, did not want him to feel obligated to pay attention to her when women like Emma Preston existed. Nathan picked up his salt. "Well, if you change your mind, I will be the one not eating the prize-winning peach pie." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, not quite a smile, and then he was gone. Clara stood in the empty store, her heart doing complicated things in her chest that she firmly told it to stop. Nathan Doyle would go to the social, would be charmed by Emma Preston or one of the other pretty girls, and would forget all about the too thin spinster who sold him supplies. That was how these things always went. There was no point in hoping otherwise. Saturday arrived hot and cloudless. Clara woke early and went through her usual routines, washing at the basin, dressing in her gray work dress, pinning her brown hair into its severe bun. Through her small window, she could see people setting up for the social in the churchyard, stringing paper lanterns and arranging tables. The women wore their finest dresses, flowers in their hair, laughter bright on their lips. Clara turned away from the window and went downstairs to open the store. The day dragged. Most of the town was either preparing for the social or already there, which meant few customers. Clara used the time to reorganize shelves and update inventory, tasks that kept her hands busy if not her mind. She tried not to think about Nathan Doyle, about whether he had gone to the social, about whether Emma Preston was batting her eyelashes at him over that prize-winning pie. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple when the bell jangled. Clara looked up from the ledger, expecting a last-minute customer needing something for the social. Instead, Nathan Doyle stood in the doorway, still wearing his work clothes, dust on his boots. "Store still open?" he asked. "For another 10 minutes," Clara said, trying to keep the surprise from her voice. "Did you need something?" Nathan stepped inside and removed his hat. "Thought maybe you might have changed your mind about that social. You did not go." The words escaped before Clara could stop them. "Told you I would only go if there was someone worth talking to there." He moved closer to the counter, and Clara's heart began to race in a way that annoyed her. She was not some silly girl to get flustered over a man's attention. "You should go," she said, keeping her voice steady. "It is a nice evening for it. There will be music and dancing." "I am not much for dancing with women who only see dollar signs and a wedding ring," Nathan said bluntly. "Had my fill of that years ago." Clara studied him, this strange man who said things directly instead of hiding behind pretty words. You could have any woman in that churchyard. Emma Preston has barely talked about anything else all week. "I do not want Emma Preston." Nathan set his hat on the counter. "I want to know why a woman who has lived in Goldfield her whole life has never left, and why she works herself to shadows in this store, and why she looks at people like she is expecting them to hurt her." The words landed like punches. Clara's hands stilled on the ledger. "That is none of your business." "Maybe not, but I am asking anyway." No one had asked Clara about herself in so long that she had almost forgotten how to answer. The careful walls she had built over 12 years warned her not to trust this, not to let herself be vulnerable. But there was something in Nathan's eyes, a steadiness that made her want to risk it. "My father died when I was 18, she heard herself say. "Left me with debts and no way to pay them except to sell everything we owned. The store owner let me work here in exchange for room and board. That was 12 years ago. I have been here ever since. No family, an aunt in San Francisco who made it clear I was not welcome." Clara's voice was flat, reciting facts that had long since stopped hurting, or so she told herself. "The town considered me difficult because I did not smile enough, did not flirt right, asked too many questions. Spinster was the polite word they used. There were less polite ones." Nathan nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had suspected. "I know what it is like to be invisible," he said. "I grew up on a ranch in Texas. My father had a legitimate family in the big house. My mother was a Mexican woman who worked in the kitchens. He paid for our little shack out back, came around when he wanted, but we were never acknowledged. I learned young that some folks look right through you, because it is easier than admitting you are human." The honesty of it stole Clara's breath. She had spent years hiding her pain behind efficiency and silence, and here was this man laying his bare after 2 conversations. "That must have been hard," she said quietly. "It was, but it taught me to see people others miss." Nathan's gaze held hers. "Like you. Every woman in this town treated me like a prize to be won. You just treated me like a customer who needed supplies. That told me more than all their pretty smiles." Clara did not know what to say to that. A part of her wanted to dismiss his words as manipulation, but the larger part, the part that was so tired of being alone, wanted desperately to believe him. "The social is probably in full swing by now," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do not care about the social." Nathan leaned against the counter, closing the distance between them. "I care about whether you would let me take you to dinner. Nothing fancy, just the boarding house dining room. Mrs. Chen makes a decent stew." Clara's practical side screamed warnings. She barely knew this man. He would be leaving Goldfield eventually, moving on to the next town and the next job. Getting attached would only lead to heartbreak. But her practical side had kept her safe and desperately lonely for 12 years, and she was suddenly so tired of being safe. "I need to close the store first," she said. Nathan's face transformed. It was not quite a smile, but something warmer, something that made Clara's chest ache. "I will wait." She locked the cash box with shaking hands and swept the floor quickly, aware of Nathan watching her every move. When she reached for her shawl, he took it from her hands and draped it over her shoulders with a gentleness that made her eyes sting. No one had touched her with gentleness in longer than she could remember. They walked through the dusty streets as the last light faded from the sky. Music and laughter drifted from the churchyard, but Clara found she did not envy the people there. She was going to dinner with a man who saw her, truly saw her, and that felt more precious than all the dances and pie contests in Nevada. Mrs. Chen's boarding house dining room was simple but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of cooking spices in the air. The other boarders were at the social, so Clara and Nathan had the room to themselves. Mrs. Chen served them stew and fresh bread, her weathered face creasing into a smile when she saw them together. "Good to see you bringing a friend, Mr. Doyle," she said in her accented English. "Too much alone is not good for young people." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that did not demand filling. Clara could not remember the last time she had shared a meal with someone. She ate her suppers alone in her room, reading or mending, the silence so complete it sometimes felt like drowning. "Tell me about the horses," she said finally, wanting to hear his voice, wanting to know more about this man who had disrupted her careful, lonely existence. Nathan's face came alive. "There is nothing better than working with horses. They are honest, you know. They do not pretend to be something they are not. They are scared, they show it. They trust you, they show that too. The mining company bought a string of Mustangs out of California, wild as the wind and twice as stubborn. But every one of them is worth the effort because once you earn a horse's trust, it will give you everything. Clara listened, fascinated not just by what he said but by how he said it. There was passion in his voice, a deep respect for the animals he worked with. "How did you learn to break horses?" she asked. "My mother's brother was a vaquero, taught me everything he knew before he died. I was 14 when I left home, could not stand being invisible anymore. Worked ranches all through Texas and New Mexico, eventually made my way up to Nevada. Been moving ever since. Do you like it?" "The moving?" Nathan considered the question, turning his spoon in his hand. "Liked it more before than I do now. Gets lonely after a while. You start to wonder what it would be like to have a place, people who know your name, someone waiting when you come home at night." He looked up at her. "What about you? You ever think about leaving Goldfield?" "Every day," Clara admitted. "But wanting to leave and being able to leave are different things. I have no money, no skills except storekeeping. Where would I go? What would I do?" "You could do anything," Nathan said with a certainty that startled her. "You are smart, organized, good with numbers. You handle customers even when they treat you poorly. Those are skills, Clara, valuable ones." No one had ever called her skilled before. Useful, perhaps. Adequate. But never skilled, never valuable. Clara looked down at her bowl, her throat tight with emotions she had no names for. "I am sorry," Nathan said quietly. "I did not mean to upset you." "You did not upset me." Clara forced herself to meet his eyes. "You are just the first person in 12 years to suggest I might be worth something. Then this town is blind." They talked until Mrs. Chen began clearing tables, their conversation ranging from books to weather to the small, ordinary details of daily life. Clara learned that Nathan could not abide coffee that was too weak, that he had a sister somewhere in Arizona he had not seen in years, that he slept poorly in towns, always waking at the sound of footsteps or voices. Nathan learned that Clara could recite entire passages from books after reading them once, that she was terrified of thunderstorms, that she had wanted to be a teacher before her father died. When Nathan finally walked her back to the store, the social was winding down, people drifting home in laughing groups. A few saw them together and stared, and Clara knew there would be talk tomorrow. But for once, she did not care. "Thank you for dinner," she said at the store's door. "Thank you for the company." Nathan's hand brushed hers, just the lightest touch, but it sent warmth racing up Clara's arm. "Can I see you again? Tomorrow maybe, after you close." Clara knew she should say no, should protect herself from the inevitable heartbreak. But she was so tired of protecting herself, so tired of being alone. "Yes," she whispered. Nathan smiled, a real smile this time, and Clara thought her heart might burst from the beauty of it. "Tomorrow, then." She watched him walk away, his tall figure disappearing into the darkness, and climbed the stairs to her little room feeling lighter than she had in years. It was foolish, probably, to let herself hope. But hope had found her anyway, stubborn and persistent as desert wildflowers after rain. The next morning, Clara woke to pounding on the store's front door. She dressed hastily and hurried downstairs to find Abigail Preston on the doorstep, her face flushed with indignation. "Clara Ashford, what on earth were you thinking, monopolizing Mr. Doyle last night?" Abigail pushed past her into the store without waiting for an invitation. "Emma was absolutely heartbroken when she heard he took you to dinner instead of attending the social." Clara's brief happiness curdled into familiar defensiveness. "I did not monopolize anyone, Mrs. Preston. Mr. Doyle asked if I would have dinner with him. I said yes. But why would he ask you?" Abigail's tone suggested this was genuinely incomprehensible. "Emma is young and pretty and accomplished. You are, well, you are." She gestured vaguely at Clara, the gesture encompassing everything Clara lacked. "I am sure you simply misunderstood his intentions. He was probably just being polite." The words stung worse, because Clara had thought the same thing herself in the dark hours of the night. But she lifted her chin and met Abigail's eyes. "That is between Mr. Doyle and myself, Mrs. Preston. Did you need something from the store?" Abigail's mouth pinched. "You are being very difficult about this, Clara. The entire town is talking. People are saying you have been, well, forward with Mr. Doyle. You should think about your reputation." "My reputation was ruined 12 years ago simply by being poor and female," Clara said, her voice cold. "What exactly do I have to lose?" Abigail gasped as if Clara had said something profane. "Well, I can see there is no reasoning with you. But mark my words, Clara Ashford, men like Nathan Doyle do not marry women like you. He will use you and move on, and then where will you be?" She swept out in a rustle of skirts, leaving Clara shaking with anger and fear because part of her believed Abigail's words. Men like Nathan, skilled and handsome and free to go anywhere, did not choose women like Clara. They chose pretty Emma Preston with her ribbon-winning pies and her accomplishments. The morning passed in a blur of customers and gossip. Clara could feel people staring at her, could hear the whispers that stopped when she drew near. By noon, half the town had found excuses to come into the store, their eyes curious and judgmental. Mrs. Henderson actually asked outright if Clara and Nathan were courting, her voice dripping with barely concealed disbelief. "We are friends," Clara said, keeping her voice neutral even though her face burned. "Friends." Mrs. Henderson repeated the word like it was foreign. "Well, I suppose everyone needs friends, though I would have thought a man like Mr. Doyle would want more than friendship from a young woman." The implication was clear and ugly. Clara's hands clenched on the counter. "If you have no further business, Mrs. Henderson, I have inventory to manage." The woman left, but others came throughout the day, each with their own version of the same message. Clara was reaching above her station. Clara was deluding herself. Clara would end up hurt and humiliated. By the time she locked the door that evening, Clara's armor of indifference was cracked and bleeding. She climbed to her room and sat on the edge of her narrow bed, Abigail's words echoing in her mind. "Men like Nathan Doyle do not marry women like you." It was true, was it not? Nathan would finish his work with the mining company and move on, as he had been moving all his life. What was one lonely spinster in one forgotten Nevada town against the open road and endless possibilities? A soft knock on the back door made her jump. She descended the stairs slowly, half expecting another townsperson come to warn her off. Instead, Nathan stood in the alley, hat in hand, his face concerned. "Mrs. Chen told me people have been bothering you all day," he said without preamble. "Because of last night, because of me." Clara's throat ached. "It is not your fault. This town has never liked me much anyway." "Can I come in?" She should say no. Having a man in the store after hours would only fuel more gossip, but Clara was so tired of letting other people's opinions dictate her choices. She stepped aside and Nathan entered, filling her small space with his presence. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I did not think about what having dinner with me might do to your reputation. I was selfish." "No," Clara shook her head fiercely. "You were not selfish, you were kind. The town is small and mean, and they cannot understand why someone like you would want to spend time with someone like me." "Someone like you?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "You mean someone smart and strong who has survived things that would have broken most people? Someone who treats others with decency even when they do not deserve it?" Someone who actually sees me instead of just seeing a hired hand they can mold into whatever they want. Each word landed like a stone in still water, rippling outward. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. Abigail Preston came by this morning. She said you would use me and move on, that men like you do not marry women like me. And you believe her? Nathan's voice was rough. I do not know what to believe. Clara's control finally snapped. You have been here 3 days, Nathan. 3 days. And I have been alone so long that I want to believe you mean what you say. But what if everyone is right? What if I am just convenient while you are in town? What if I let myself care about you, and then you leave and I am even more alone than before? The words hung in the air between them. Clara's hands were shaking, her chest tight. She had said too much, revealed too much. Now Nathan would see her for what she really was, desperate and pathetic and so starved for affection that 3 days of attention had cracked her open. But Nathan did not look disgusted or pitying. He looked angry, but not at her. You want to know why I asked you to dinner? Because in 2 days of watching you, I saw something I have been looking for my whole life. A woman who knows what it is like to be invisible, who has every reason to be bitter but chose kindness instead. A woman who does not want anything from me except maybe the chance to be seen. He moved closer, and Clara could not retreat because the counter was at her back. I am not using you, Clara. I am not going to hurt you and move on. I am 34 years old, and I have spent half my life moving from place to place because I was too afraid to admit I wanted something permanent. And then I walked into this store and saw you measuring flour for a woman who did not even look at you, and something in my chest just settled. Clara's breath caught. Nathan. I know 3 days is not long enough to make promises, he continued. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I am asking you to try. Let me court you properly. Let me prove that I am not what this town thinks I am. What does this town think you are? Clara whispered, a drifter, someone who will take what he can get and disappear. Nathan's eyes held hers. But I am tired of drifting, Clara. I am tired of being alone. If you will let me, I want to stay. I want to see where this goes. Everything in Clara warned against believing him. She had learned through hard experience not to trust pretty words and promises, but Nathan's words did not feel pretty or practiced. They felt raw and real and frighteningly sincere. The whole town will be against us, she said. They will make things difficult. Let them. I do not have anything to offer you. No money, no connections, no beauty. Nathan's hand came up to cup her cheek, the gesture so tender it made Clara's eyes burn. You have yourself. That is more than enough. And then he kissed her, soft and careful, asking rather than taking. Clara had been kissed before, fumbling encounters in her youth that had led nowhere. But this was different. This felt like a promise, like hope, like the beginning of something she had stopped letting herself want. When Nathan pulled back, Clara was trembling. I am scared, she admitted. Me too, he said. But maybe we can be scared together. Over the next weeks, Nathan courted Clara with a determination that both thrilled and terrified her. He appeared at the store each evening when she closed, walking her to dinner at Mrs. Chen's, or sitting with her in the small patch of shade behind the building, talking until the stars came out. He brought her wildflowers from the desert, taught her the names of the horses he was training, listened to her read passages from her books. The town watched with varying degrees of shock and disapproval. Emma Preston cried for a week, and Abigail Preston made pointed comments about impropriety whenever Clara crossed her path. The men gathered at the saloon speculated crudely about what Nathan saw in the dried-up spinster, while the women clucked their tongues and predicted disaster. But there were small kindnesses, too. Mrs. Chen began including extra portions when she served Clara dinner, her eyes warm with approval. Old Mr. Jennings, who had been buying supplies from Clara for years, told her gruffly that it was about time someone appreciated her. And Sadie, one of the saloon girls who occasionally came to the store for headache powder, squeezed Clara's hand and whispered, "Do not let them steal this from you." Clara tried not to. She tried to be brave, to believe Nathan when he told her she was beautiful, to accept his affection without constantly questioning his motives. But 12 years of invisibility and hurt did not disappear overnight. Sometimes, when Nathan smiled at her, Clara still looked over her shoulder to see who he was really smiling at. One evening, about a month after they had met, Nathan took Clara out to the corrals to show her his progress with the Mustangs. The horses were magnificent, all wild grace and power, their coats gleaming in the sunset light. "Watch this," Nathan said, entering the corral with a black mare who had been the most difficult to tame. He approached her slowly, speaking in a low, steady voice. The mare's ears flicked nervously, but she did not bolt. Nathan held out his hand, and after a long moment, the mare stretched her neck and nuzzled his palm. Clara's throat tightened. There was something profoundly moving about watching this wild creature choose trust. When Nathan led the mare around the corral, his hand on her neck, Clara understood what he had meant about horses being honest. The mare could have run, could have fought. Instead, she walked beside Nathan because he had earned her trust through patience and gentleness. Nathan released the mare and came to lean against the fence beside Clara. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That you are very good at what you do." Clara's voice was soft. "That you understand what it means to be afraid and need gentling." Nathan's hand found hers, their fingers lacing together. "You are not a horse that needs breaking, Clara. You are already whole. You have just been made to believe you are not." "Sometimes I forget," Clara admitted. "Sometimes I look in the mirror and see what this town has told me I am, too old, too plain, too difficult, and I wonder why you stay." Nathan turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "Look at me." When Clara raised her eyes, he continued, "You are 30 years old, not ancient. You are not plain, you are striking in a way that has nothing to do with ribbons and curls. And you are not difficult, you are strong. This town tried to make you small, but you refused. That is not a flaw, Clara. That is courage." The words broke something open in Clara's chest. She had held herself together for so long through sheer will, never crying, never complaining, never letting anyone see how much their rejection hurt. But Nathan's kindness was a stronger force than her will. She began to cry, great shaking sobs that came from someplace deep and broken. Nathan pulled her against his chest and held her while she wept, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring words she could not quite hear but felt in her bones. When the storm passed, Clara felt scraped hollow but somehow lighter. She pulled back, embarrassed by her swollen eyes and blotchy face. "I am sorry. I do not know where that came from. Do not be sorry." Nathan's thumb wiped away the last tears from her cheeks. "You have been strong for everyone else for 12 years. It is time to let someone be strong for you." Clara looked up at this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she had stopped praying. "I love you," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I know it is too soon and probably foolish, but I do. I love you, and I am terrified because I do not know how to do this, how to trust this." Nathan's face transformed, joy and relief washing over his features. "It is not too soon and it is not foolish." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her mouth. "I love you too, Clara. I have loved you since you refused to let me leave that extra nickel. I love your stubbornness and your strength and the way you treat everyone with kindness even when they do not deserve it. What are we going to do?" Clara asked, because loving each other did not solve the practical problems. Nathan's job with the mining company would end eventually. Clara had nowhere else to go. I have been thinking about that. Nathan's arms tightened around her. The mining company wants to keep me on permanent. They need someone to manage their horses and wagons. It is good pay, steady work. And I was thinking if you were willing we could get married. You could leave the store and we could find a place of our own. Nothing fancy but ours. Clara's heart stuttered. Married, if you will have me. Nathan's voice was steady, but she could feel his heart racing under her palm. I know I am not much. I have some money saved but not a fortune. I can offer you a home and my name and every bit of love I have. It will not be easy. This town will talk, and there will be people who try to make us regret it. But Clara, I want to marry you. I want to wake up next to you and come home to you and build a life with you. Clara thought about her little room above the store, about 12 more years of measuring flour and enduring pity and eating supper alone. Then she thought about waking next to Nathan, about a home they built together, about finally being seen and chosen and loved. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. Nathan kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Clara kissed him back with 12 years of loneliness and hunger and hope. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the stars had come out above them, brilliant and countless in the desert sky. When? Clara asked, practical even in the midst of joy. As soon as possible. Nathan's grin was boyish. I do not want to give you time to change your mind. I will not change my mind. Clara said it fiercely, making it a vow. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church on the edge of town. The ceremony was simple, attended by Mrs. Chen, old Mr. Jennings, Sadie from the saloon, and a handful of others who had shown Clara small kindnesses over the years. The rest of Goldfield stayed away, their absence a final rejection that Clara found she did not mind. She was too full of happiness to have room for their disapproval. Clara wore a dress she had sewn herself from blue calico, nothing fancy but clean and new. Nathan wore his Sunday best, his hair slicked back, his eyes never leaving her face. When the preacher asked if Nathan took Clara to be his wife, he said, I do, with such conviction that several people in the small congregation smiled. When Clara said her own vows, her voice was steady and sure, all doubt burned away by the look in Nathan's eyes. Afterward, Mrs. Chen hosted a small reception at the boarding house. There was food and music from a fiddle player, and for the first time in her life, Clara danced. Nathan was not practiced at it, and neither was she, but it did not matter. They moved together in the lamp-lit dining room while their few friends clapped and cheered, and Clara felt beautiful. Happy, Nathan murmured against her hair. More than I knew I could be, Clara replied honestly. They spent their wedding night in a small house Nathan had rented on the outskirts of town, far enough from the main street to feel private. It was simple, just 3 rooms and a kitchen, but to Clara it was a palace. Her own home, her own life, her own choice. Nathan was gentle with her, patient with her nervousness and inexperience. He made love to her like she was precious, and Clara discovered that her body was capable of joy she had never imagined. Afterward, wrapped in his arms, she felt the last pieces of her old self, the invisible unwanted self, fall away. She was Clara Doyle now, and she was loved. The next morning, Clara woke in a bed that was not her narrow cot above the store, in a room filled with golden sunlight. Nathan was already awake, propped on one elbow, watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. Good morning, wife, he said. Good morning, husband. The words felt strange and wonderful on her tongue. They ate breakfast together, just bread and coffee, but it was the finest meal Clara had ever tasted because she was sharing it with Nathan in their home. Afterward, she walked to the store to give notice to Mr. Peterson, the owner. She had expected him to be difficult, but he just shrugged and said he would hire someone else. You have been here 12 years, Clara said, stung by his indifference. "I thought you might at least acknowledge that." "You did your job," Mr. Peterson said. "That is what I paid you for. But you are married now, so you do not need the work." Clara realized she did not care about his dismissal. She was leaving on her terms, walking toward a life she had chosen rather than one forced on her by circumstance. "Then I am done. Immediately." "What about notice?" "You said you will hire someone else, so hire them." Clara untied her apron and set it on the counter. "Goodbye, Mr. Peterson." She walked out of the store without looking back, her steps light despite the heat. When she reached her new home, Nathan was waiting on the small porch he had been building. "How did it go?" he asked. "I quit." Clara laughed at the shocked expression on Nathan's face. "Immediately, without notice. I have never done anything like that in my life. Good for you." Nathan pulled her into his arms. "How does freedom feel?" Clara tilted her face to the sun, feeling its warmth on her skin. "Terrifying. Wonderful. Real." The days that followed settled into a rhythm that Clara had never experienced before. She woke with Nathan, made them breakfast while he tended to the small garden plot he was cultivating, and then she set about making their house into a home. She sewed curtains from fabric Mrs. Chen helped her find, scrubbed floors until they gleamed, arranged wildflowers in a jar on their table. Nathan worked with the mining company's horses during the day and came home to her each evening, dirty and tired but always smiling when he saw her. They talked about everything and nothing. Nathan told her about the places he had been, the people he had known, the loneliness that had followed him like a shadow. Clara shared memories she had buried, about her father's illness and the slow erosion of her dreams, about the years of invisibility and the small humiliations she had endured. Each confession brought them closer, knitting them together in ways beyond the physical, but the town had not forgotten them. Clara quickly learned that being married to Nathan did not grant her acceptance. When she went to the general store for supplies, conversations stopped. Women she had served for years looked through her as if she were glass. Abigail Preston actually crossed the street to avoid her, dragging Emma along despite the girl's curious backward glances. The men were worse. They made crude jokes about what Nathan saw in the skinny spinster, speculating loudly about how desperate she must be. When Nathan overheard some miners laughing about it at the corrals, he broke one man's nose and nearly broke another's jaw before the foreman pulled him off. "They are not worth your fists," Clara said that evening, cleaning his split knuckles with careful hands. "They are worth defending you," Nathan replied grimly. "I am used to it. I have heard worse." "Well, you should not be used to it, and I will not stand for worse." Nathan caught her hands. "You are my wife, Clara. That means something to me. It means everything." Clara kissed him, overwhelmed by the ferocity of his protectiveness. She had been taking care of herself for so long that having someone willing to fight for her felt both strange and deeply right. But the hostility took its toll. Clara tried to make friends with the other wives, attending a church quilting circle at Nathan's gentle insistence. The women were polite in the way people are when they want to appear charitable, but they did not include her in their conversations. They talked around her about children and husbands and social events Clara was never invited to. After 2 hours of being ignored in a roomful of people, Clara went home and told Nathan she would not be going back. "I am sorry," he said, pulling her against his chest. "I thought maybe if they got to know you. They do not want to know me. They want to feel superior because I was poor and alone and now I am not." Clara's voice was bitter. "Let them have it. We do not need them." But isolation wore on her. Clara had spent 12 years alone by circumstance. Being alone by choice should have felt different, but it still ached. She tried to fill her days with work, cooking and cleaning and sewing, But the house was small and the work was done too quickly, leaving her with long hours and nothing to do but think. Nathan noticed her growing sadness. One evening, he came home with a proposition. The mining company wants to expand their operations. They need someone to manage their books, keep track of inventory, handle correspondence. I told them you could do it. Clara stared at him. You did what? You are good with numbers and organization. You ran that store for 12 years practically by yourself. The mining company needs someone they can trust, and I trust you. Nathan's expression was earnest. It would be real work, Clara, not just cleaning up after me. They will pay you a fair wage. Hope and fear warred in Clara's chest. They will not want me. The town already hates me. The mining company is not the town. The foreman, Jack Morrison, he is a fair man. He does not care about gossip, just about whether you can do the job. Nathan took her hands. At least talk to him. If you do not want it, you do not have to take it. Clara met with Jack Morrison the next day, her stomach in knots. He was a gruff man in his 50s with sun-weathered skin and sharp eyes that assessed her carefully. Nathan says you have experience keeping books, he said without preamble. 12 years at Peterson's General Store. I managed inventory, balanced accounts, handled orders. Clara kept her voice steady despite her nerves. Can you read and write proper? Yes, sir. Do you know arithmetic, percentages and such? Yes, sir. Jack Morrison pulled out a ledger and pushed it across the desk. Take a look at this. Tell me what you see. Clara studied the columns of figures, quickly identifying several errors and inefficiencies. She pointed them out, explaining how the system could be improved to reduce waste and track costs more accurately. Jack listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he grunted. You are hired. Start Monday. Pay is $40 a month. Clara's breath caught. $40 was more than she had ever made in her life. Truly, I do not say things I do not mean. Jack's face softened slightly. I heard the talk about you and Nathan. I do not care about that. I care whether you can do the job. Nathan says you can, and what I just saw confirms it. The rest is noise. Clara left the meeting feeling like she could float. She had a job, a real job that required her skills and paid her fairly. When she told Nathan that evening, he swept her up and spun her around their small kitchen, both of them laughing. I told you, he said. I told you that you were valuable. Clara's work with the mining company transformed her days. She arrived each morning at the company office, a small building near the main mine entrance, and spent her time organizing records, processing payroll, and managing correspondence with suppliers. The work was challenging and engaging, requiring all her attention and skill. For the first time since her father died, Clara felt useful in a way that mattered. The miners were wary of her at first, unsure how to treat the boss's wife who was also their bookkeeper. But Clara treated them with the same courtesy she had shown customers at the store, learning their names and greeting them when they came to collect their pay. Gradually, they warmed to her. When one miner's wife was ill, Clara used company connections to locate a doctor willing to travel to Goldfield. When another miner was injured, Clara ensured his pay continued while he recovered. Small acts of kindness that cost her nothing, but meant everything to men who were used to being treated as expendable. Word of her competence and fairness spread. Within 3 months, miners who had sneered at the dried-up spinster Nathan married were tipping their hats to Mrs. Doyle and asking her advice on financial matters. Jack Morrison told Nathan he did not know how the company had managed before Clara, and gave her a raise without her asking. Clara bloomed under the work and respect. She began to carry herself differently, with a confidence born not from defiance, but from knowing her own worth. Nathan watched the transformation with pride and growing love, falling more in love with her each day as she became fully herself. But not everyone was happy about Clara's success. Abigail Preston, in particular, seemed to take it as a personal affront that the woman she had written off was now more prosperous and respected than many of the town's so-called respectable wives. The confrontation came on a Saturday afternoon when Clara was shopping for fabric. Abigail swept into the store with Emma and two other women, their voices carrying. "I simply do not understand why the mining company would hire someone with no proper education," Abigail was saying, loudly enough to ensure Clara heard. "There are young men who have studied at universities who would be more suitable." "Perhaps they wanted someone who could actually do the job," Clara said, unable to help herself. Abigail spun around, her face flushing. "Clara, I was not speaking to you. You were speaking about me." Rather loudly, Clara set down the fabric she had been examining. "If you have something to say to me, Mrs. Preston, say it directly." "Very well." Abigail drew herself up. "I think it is inappropriate for a woman to work outside the home, particularly in a position of authority over men. It is unnatural and unfeminine. You are making a spectacle of yourself and embarrassing your husband." "My husband is proud of my work," Clara said evenly. "As for being unfeminine, I was not aware that competence was solely a masculine trait." Several other shoppers had stopped to listen, their faces avid with interest. Emma Preston looked mortified, while the other women with Abigail seemed torn between shock and secret approval. "You have always been difficult," Abigail hissed. "Even when you were a nobody working in a store, you thought you were better than everyone else. Now you have tricked some man into marrying you and convinced the mining company to give you a job you are not qualified for, and you act like you have accomplished something." The words were designed to hurt, to cut Clara back down to the invisible nobody she had been. 6 months ago they might have worked, but Clara was not that woman anymore. "I did not trick Nathan into anything," she said calmly. "He chose me and I chose him. As for my job, I earned it through 12 years of hard work and skill. If that bothers you, Mrs. Preston, perhaps you should examine why. Now, if you will excuse me, I have shopping to complete." She turned back to the fabric, dismissing Abigail as thoroughly as Abigail had dismissed her for 12 years. The other woman stood there for a moment, sputtering, before sweeping out of the store with her entourage. But Clara noticed Emma did not follow immediately. The girl lingered, and when Clara glanced at her, Emma said quietly, "I am happy for you, Mrs. Doyle, truly." Then she was gone, leaving Clara oddly moved. Perhaps not everyone in Goldfield had forgotten she was human after all. That evening, Clara told Nathan about the encounter. He listened with a deepening scowl, but when she finished, he surprised her by laughing. "What is funny?" Clara asked. "You standing up to Abigail Preston and then calmly shopping for fabric." Nathan pulled her into his lap, his arms encircling her waist. "You have changed so much, Clara. When I first met you, you would have let her say those things and said nothing back." "When you first met me, I believed them," Clara said simply. "I do not anymore. You taught me I was worth more. You taught yourself. I just reminded you." They sat together in the gathering dusk, and Clara marveled at how her life had transformed. 6 months ago, she had been invisible, alone, convinced she would spend the rest of her days measuring flour and sleeping in a narrow bed above a store. Now she had a husband who loved her, meaningful work, and the respect of people who mattered. She had thought happiness was something other people experienced, but here it was, filling her chest until she thought she might burst. "Nathan," she said softly, thank you for seeing me. For choosing me, for loving me." Nathan's arms tightened. "Thank you for letting me, for trusting me, for loving me back." The first anniversary of the day Nathan walked into Peterson's general store arrived with autumn cooling the desert heat. Clara woke early, watching the sunrise paint their bedroom walls gold and rose. Nathan slept beside her, his face peaceful in the early light. She studied him, this man who had given her back herself, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude and love. They spent the day quietly, Nathan taking time away from the horses to accompany Clara on a ride into the desert. He had taught her to ride over the past months, patient with her initial fear and clumsy in the saddle. Now she could ride confidently, and they went out often, just the two of them and the endless sky. They stopped at a place where the rocks formed natural shelters and wildflowers grew in impossible profusion, despite the dry soil. Nathan spread a blanket and unpacked the lunch Clara had prepared, simple food made special by the setting and the company. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked as they ate. "Marrying me, staying in Goldfield, giving up the traveling life?" "Never." Nathan's answer was immediate and firm. "Do you regret tying yourself to a former drifter with more past than prospects?" "Never," Clara echoed. "I have more now than I ever dreamed possible. You gave me that. We gave each other that." Nathan reached for her hand. "I was so lonely before you, Clara. I thought I was fine, thought movement was enough. But it was just running from the fact that I did not have a home, did not have anyone who knew me and loved me anyway. You gave me that. You gave me a reason to stay." Clara leaned against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "The town is beginning to accept us, I think. Or at least they have stopped openly being cruel." It was true. Over the months, Goldfield's attitude had shifted from hostility to grudging tolerance. Clara's competence at the mining company had forced people to acknowledge her, and Nathan's skill with horses made him indispensable. They were no longer the spectacle they had been, just another married couple trying to build a life. "I do not care if they accept us or not," Nathan said. "As long as we have each other." "I care a little," Clara admitted. "I would like our children to grow up in a town that treats them with kindness." She felt Nathan go still beside her. "Children?" Clara pulled back to look at him, suddenly nervous. They had never discussed children directly, though she had assumed they both wanted them eventually. "Yes, I mean if you want them. Do you want children?" "I want everything with you." Nathan's voice was rough with emotion. "Children, a life, a future, all of it. Good." Clara's smile was tremulous. "Because I think we might be having one. A child, I mean. I am fairly certain I am pregnant." Nathan's eyes went wide. "Certain? How certain? When?" "Maybe 4 months. I was not sure at first, but now." She placed his hand on her stomach, where the slightest swell was beginning to show. "I have not wanted to say anything until I was certain, but I am certain now." "Clara." Nathan's voice broke on her name. He dropped to his knees in front of her, pressing his face to her stomach, his arms wrapped around her waist. "Clara, we are going to have a baby." "We are going to have a baby," she repeated, laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you happy?" "Happy." Nathan looked up at her, his eyes wet. "I am terrified and ecstatic and so grateful I can barely breathe. We are going to have a family, Clara. A real family." They held each other in the desert silence, two people who had been alone most of their lives now creating something entirely new. Clara thought about the child growing inside her, about what kind of life they would give it. Not wealth or status, but love. So much love. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Clara continued working at the mining company until her 6th month, when the baby's size made it difficult to sit comfortably at a desk all day. Jack Morrison told her the job would be waiting when she was ready to return, an assurance that made her eyes sting with gratitude. The women of Goldfield, seeing Clara pregnant and glowing, began to soften toward her. Babies had a way of making people set aside old grievances, and Clara found herself receiving unexpected kindnesses. Mrs. Henderson brought by baby clothes her own children had outgrown. Sadie from the saloon knitted tiny booties. Even Emma Preston appeared one afternoon with a carefully wrapped package containing a beautiful baby blanket she had embroidered. "My mother does not know I am here," Emma said quietly, "but I wanted you to have this. I think you will be a wonderful mother, Mrs. Doyle." Clara invited her in for tea, and they talked for over an hour. Emma confessed that she had envied Clara, not for stealing Nathan away as her mother claimed, but for having the courage to choose her own path. She was engaged now to a banker's son, a match her mother had arranged, and she was not sure she wanted to go through with it. "You love him?" Clara asked. "I barely know him." Emma stared into her teacup. "He is suitable and my mother is pleased, but when I think about marrying him, I just feel empty." "Then do not marry him." Clara said it simply, but Emma looked up in shock. "I cannot just refuse. My mother would never forgive me. Your mother will survive." Clara's voice was gentle but firm. "But you have to live with your choice for the rest of your life. Is your mother's approval worth being miserable?" Emma left soon after, but Clara could see the thoughts turning behind her eyes. 2 weeks later, the engagement was broken, and Emma left Goldfield to visit an aunt in San Francisco. Abigail Preston blamed Clara for putting ideas in her daughter's head, but Clara found she did not mind. If Emma found even a fraction of the happiness Clara had found, it would be worth Abigail's ire. Clara's labor began on a cold February morning in 1888, nearly 16 months after Nathan had walked into her life. The pain was intense and frightening, but Nathan stayed with her despite the doctor's protests that the birthing room was no place for a man. He held her hand and wiped her brow and told her she was strong. She could do this. She was amazing when their daughter finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect. Clara wept with relief and joy. Nathan stared at the tiny baby in his arms like she was made of glass and miracles. "She is so small," he whispered. "She is perfect," Clara said. "What should we name her?" They had discussed names endlessly over the past months. Now, looking at her daughter's fierce little face, Clara knew. "Hope, her name is Hope." "Hope Doyle." Nathan tested the name, then smiled. "Yes. That is exactly right." Hope was a demanding baby, crying often and sleeping little. Clara stumbled through those early weeks exhausted and overwhelmed, learning to feed and change and soothe this tiny person who depended entirely on her. Nathan helped as much as he could, walking Hope for hours when she cried, changing her nappies with fumbling but determined hands, sitting with Clara through the long nights. The town came to see the baby, their curiosity overcoming lingering hostility. Even Abigail Preston appeared, though she said nothing about Emma. She looked at Hope with something like wistfulness and told Clara she had been blessed. As the months passed, Clara settled into motherhood. Hope grew from a squalling infant into a chubby baby who smiled and laughed and reached for her parents with complete trust. Clara would watch Nathan playing with their daughter, his big hands gentle as he tickled her belly or sang her nonsensical songs, and feel so full of love she thought she might burst. When Hope was 6 months old, Clara returned to work at the mining company part-time, bringing the baby with her. Jack Morrison had a cradle installed in her office, and Hope spent her days napping or playing while Clara worked. The miners, rough men who spent their days in darkness and danger, became absurdly gentle around the baby, competing to make her smile. Life found a rhythm again, different from before but deeply satisfying. Clara's days were full of work and motherhood, and the simple pleasures of living with someone she loved. She and Nathan talked about having more children, maybe a son next time, and Clara found herself hoping for a big family to fill their small house with noise and love. 2 years after Hope's birth, Clara gave birth to a son they named James. He was easier than Hope had been, a calm baby who slept well and rarely fussed. Hope, now a walking, talking whirlwind of energy, was fascinated by her baby brother and insisted on helping with everything. Nathan built an addition onto their house to accommodate their growing family. It was still modest, but it was theirs, filled with the sounds of children and laughter. Clara sometimes thought about the silent little room above Peterson's general store where she had spent 12 years, and marveled at how completely her life had changed. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Nathan took Clara to the same spot in the desert where he had proposed to her. The children were with Mrs. Chen, who had become a beloved grandmother figure. Clara and Nathan sat on a blanket under the stars, much as they had that first time. 5 years, Nathan said, his arm around Clara's shoulders. Feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean. Clara leaned against him, comfortable and content. I still sometimes wake up and think I am dreaming, that I will open my eyes and be back in that little room alone. You are not alone. You will never be alone again. Nathan kissed her temple. I wish I could go back and tell the Clara I met 5 years ago how incredible her life would become, how loved she would be. She would not have believed you, Clara said softly. She had given up hope. But I would have been right. Nathan turned her to face him. You are loved, Clara, by me, by our children, by the people who have come to know you. The town that forgot you, that treated you like you did not matter, they see you now. They see what they missed. It was true. Clara was no longer invisible. People greeted her on the street, asked her advice, invited her to social gatherings. She served on the church committee and helped organize the school fundraiser. She was Mrs. Doyle, respected bookkeeper and mother, wife of the capable horsebreaker everyone relied on. The transformation was so complete that sometimes Clara forgot she had ever been anything else. But she never forgot where she came from. When a young woman arrived in Goldfield running from a bad situation, Clara made sure she found work and a safe place to stay. When miners struggled to feed their families, Clara used her position to ensure they received fair pay and treatment. She remembered what it was like to be invisible and powerless, and she used her visibility and power to help others. Nathan continued working with the mining company, eventually becoming the head of their entire transportation department. He hired other men like himself, drifters and loners who needed a chance, and taught them not just horse breaking, but how to build a life worth staying for. Their family grew. After James came another daughter, Rose, and then another son, William. 4 children in 8 years kept Clara and Nathan busy and exhausted and happier than either had ever imagined possible. The house they had built was always full of noise and mess and love. Hope grew into a serious, thoughtful girl who loved books as much as her mother. James was gentle and good with animals, following his father around the corrals from the time he could walk. Rose was wild and fearless, always climbing things and getting into trouble. William was still a baby, but he had Nathan's eyes and Clara's stubborn chin. Clara sometimes thought about the town's initial reaction to her marriage, about Abigail Preston's prediction that Nathan would use her and leave. She thought about how easily she could have believed those words, could have protected herself right out of the best thing that ever happened to her. But she had taken the risk, had chosen to trust Nathan and herself, and everything had changed because of it. On a warm evening in late summer, 10 years after Nathan had first walked into the general store, Clara stood on their porch watching her children play in the yard. Hope was reading to James under a tree while Rose attempted to teach William to walk. Nathan came up behind her, his arms encircling her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I am glad you forgot to buy salt that day," Clara said, smiling. Nathan laughed. "I did not forget. I just wanted an excuse to see you again." Clara turned in his arms to look at him. 10 years had added a few lines to his face and silver to his hair, but he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. "I know. I figured that out eventually. Took you long enough." Nathan's eyes crinkled with amusement. "You were so determined not to believe I could be interested in you. Can you blame me? I had spent 12 years being invisible. You were never invisible to me. From the moment I saw you, you were all I could see." Clara kissed him, slow and sweet, tasting love and history and home. When she pulled back, she said, "Thank you for seeing me, Nathan Doyle. Thank you for loving me when I did not know how to love myself." "Thank you for letting me love you," Nathan replied. "Thank you for building this life with me, for giving me a home and a family and a reason to stay." They stood together in the fading light, watching their children play, and Clara thought about how one person's kindness could change everything. How being seen could transform a life. How love could take root in the most unlikely places and grow into something beautiful. Goldfield had forgotten Clara Ashford, the difficult spinster who worked in the general store. But they remembered Clara Doyle, the competent bookkeeper and devoted mother who had proven everyone wrong. And if Clara sometimes took a certain satisfaction in that reversal, well, she thought she had earned it. The town had seen what they missed, and Clara had seen what she was capable of when someone believed in her. It was more than enough. It was everything. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Nathan called the children inside for supper. They came running, all 4 of them, their voices bright with laughter and complaints and demands for attention. Clara herded them toward the house, wiping dirt from faces and settling disputes, her heart full to bursting with the beautiful, chaotic, perfect life she had built. She was not invisible anymore. She was not alone. She was loved and needed and valued. And every day she woke up grateful for the cowboy who had walked into a general store and seen something worth saving in a woman everyone else had forgotten. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Clara and Nathan sat together on their porch, holding hands and watching the moon rise over the desert. They did not need words anymore, could communicate entire conversations with a glance or a touch. But Nathan spoke anyway, his voice soft in the darkness. "I love you, Clara Doyle, today and every day for the rest of my life." "I love you too," Clara whispered back. "More than I ever thought I could love anyone." And in that moment, with the desert wind sighing around them and their children sleeping safely inside, Clara knew that she had found what she had stopped believing existed. A home, a family, a love that would last. The spinster everyone forgot had been found, had been chosen, had been cherished. It was, Clara thought, the happiest ending she could have imagined, and it was only the beginning. Years continued to flow like water through the canyons, steady and sure, carving deeper connections and richer memories. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and dreams. Hope, at 15, was already talking about becoming a teacher, her nose always in a book, her questions about the world endless. James, at 13, had his father's gift with animals and spent every spare moment at the corrals. Rose, 11, was the wild one, always riding too fast, climbing too high, living too loud. And William, 9 now, was the peacemaker, gentle and thoughtful, with a gift for seeing what people needed before they asked. Clara watched them grow with a mixture of pride and poignancy, knowing these years were precious and fleeting. She had been 30 when Nathan married her, 40 now, and the passage of time was evident in the silver threading through her hair and the lines around her eyes. But she wore her age with grace, secure in the knowledge that she was loved. Nathan turned 44 that year, his body still strong from years of physical work, but moving a bit slower, more careful. They joked about growing old together, about the aches and pains that came with age, but beneath the humor was a deep contentment. They had built something lasting, something worth every hardship. The mining company continued to thrive, and Clara's role expanded. She was now managing not just the books, but helping make strategic decisions about expansion and operations. Jack Morrison had retired 2 years earlier, and the new owner, a man from San Francisco, had been skeptical about keeping a woman in such a prominent position. But Clara's results spoke for themselves, and within 6 months, he was praising her acumen and offering her a percentage of the profits. Clara used the extra money to help establish a school in Goldfield. The town had grown substantially over the years, and the old one-room schoolhouse was inadequate. She spearheaded a fundraising campaign, contributed her own money, and convinced the mining company to match donations. Within a year, they had a proper school building with 2 classrooms and supplies for 50 students. Hope was one of the first to volunteer as a teacher's assistant, her face glowing with purpose. Clara watched her oldest daughter helping younger children with their letters and felt a connection across time to her own younger self. The girl who had wanted to be a teacher before life had other plans. But this time, the dream would not die. This time, Hope would have the chances Clara never had. Nathan's work also evolved. He was training younger men now more than breaking horses himself, passing on his knowledge and skill to the next generation. He had a reputation throughout Nevada as one of the best horsemen in the territory, and people came from far away to learn from him. He was patient with his students, remembering what it was like to be young and uncertain, and many of the young men he trained became like sons to him. One of those young men was Daniel, a 19-year-old from California who had shown up in Goldfield with nothing but determination and a way with horses. Nathan took him under his wing, taught him everything he knew, and eventually hired him as his assistant. Daniel was quiet and hardworking, and Clara noticed how Hope's eyes followed him when he came to the house for dinner. "Should we be worried?" Nathan asked one night after Daniel had left and Hope had gone dreamily to bed. "About what?" Clara was mending a tear in William's shirt, her needle flashing in the lamplight. "About Hope and Daniel. She is only 15. "She is almost 16, Clara corrected. "And we are not arranging their marriage, just noticing that she notices him. If something develops when she is older, we will deal with it then. But Nathan, you have trained him. You know what kind of man he is. Would it be so terrible if eventually they cared for each other?" Nathan considered this. "I suppose not. He is a good man, works hard, treats people right." "But she is my daughter, Clara. My little girl." Clara set down her mending and went to sit beside her husband. "She is growing up. They all are. We cannot stop that, much as we might want to. All we can do is raise them to make good choices and trust that we have done our job well." "When did you get so wise?" Nathan asked, pulling her close. "I have always been wise," Clara replied with a smile. "You just gave me the chance to show it. That winter brought a hard freeze, unusual for Nevada but not unheard of. The desert transformed into a strange, glittering landscape of ice and frozen sage. The children were delighted, having never seen so much ice before, but the cold was hard on the animals and the people who depended on them. Nathan worked long hours making sure the mining company's horses were warm and fed, coming home each night exhausted and half frozen. Clara kept the stove burning constantly, made endless pots of soup and coffee, and worried about her husband's weathered face and persistent cough. When the cough worsened, she insisted he see the doctor despite his protests. "It is just a cold," Nathan grumbled. "I have had worse." "You are 44 years old and you have been working in freezing temperatures for weeks," Clara said firmly. "You are seeing the doctor." The doctor confirmed it was just a bad cold but warned Nathan to take it easier. "You are not as young as you used to be," he said bluntly. "Your body needs rest to recover." Nathan was forced to spend 3 days in bed, chafing at the inactivity but too weak to argue effectively. Clara nursed him with the same determination she brought to everything, and the children took turns sitting with him, reading aloud or telling him about their days. Daniel stepped up to handle the horsework, proving he had learned his lessons well. On the 3rd day, when Nathan's fever finally broke, he pulled Clara down beside him on the bed. "I was scared," he admitted. "Lying here coughing, I kept thinking about dying and leaving you and the children. I am not ready for that, Clara. I want years more with you." "Then you will have them," Clara said fiercely. "We are going to grow old together, Nathan Doyle. We are going to see our children married and have grandchildren and sit on our porch when we are ancient and tell stories about the old days. Do you hear me?" "Yes, madam." Nathan's smile was weak but genuine. "I hear you." He recovered slowly, and true to the doctor's warning, he was never quite as strong afterward. He moved more carefully, delegated more of the physical work to Daniel and the other young men. It was hard for him, admitting his limitations, but Clara helped him see it not as weakness but as wisdom. "You are teaching them," she said. "Passing on what you know so it is not lost. That is more valuable than being able to break horses yourself." Spring came, and with it Hope's 16th birthday. She was no longer a child but a young woman, tall and serious, with Clara's striking features softened by youth. The party Clara threw for her was well attended, and Clara noticed Daniel watching Hope with an expression that made her remember Nathan looking at her across the general store counter all those years ago. After the party, as Clara was cleaning up, Hope came to help. They worked in companionable silence for a while before Hope said, "Daniel asked if he could write to me." Clara's hand stilled on the plate she was washing. "Write to you? Is he going somewhere?" "No, but he said he wanted to court me properly, and that means asking your and Papa's permission first and establishing his intentions clearly." Hope's cheeks were pink. "I told him yes, but only if you and Papa approved." Clara turned to study her daughter. "Do you care for him?" "I think so." "I know I am young, but Mama, when I am around him, I feel seen, like he understands who I am and likes me anyway." Hope's eyes were anxious. "Does that make sense?" Clara's throat tightened with memory and emotion. "That makes perfect sense. That is exactly how your father makes me feel." They talked for a long time that night, Clara sharing her own story, the loneliness and invisibility and the miracle of Nathan seeing her. Hope listened with shining eyes, and Clara saw her daughter understanding in a new way what her parents' marriage meant. "I want what you and Papa have," Hope said quietly. "I want someone who sees me and chooses me and builds a life with me. If Daniel might be that person, I want the chance to find out." Nathan, when consulted, was less immediately enthusiastic. But after a long conversation with Daniel, during which the young man laid out his intentions and prospects with impressive clarity, Nathan gave his blessing. "But you are waiting until she is 18, he told Daniel firmly. "And if you hurt her, I will make you regret it." "Yes, sir," Daniel said. "I understand completely." The courtship proceeded slowly and properly, Daniel courting Hope with a steadiness that reminded Clara painfully of Nathan. He brought her books and wildflowers, listened to her talk about teaching, and never pressed for more than she was willing to give. Hope bloomed under his attention, growing in confidence and grace. Clara watched the courtship with mixed feelings. She was happy for Hope, but also aware that her daughter growing up meant their family was changing. Soon Hope would marry and leave, and then the other children would follow, and the house that was always so full of noise would grow quiet. "That is what is supposed to happen," Nathan said when she voiced these thoughts. "We raise them to leave to build their own lives. That is success, Clara, not failure. I know. It is just hard to imagine this house without them." Nathan pulled her close. "We will still have each other. And grandchildren eventually. I am told they are quite entertaining." Clara laughed despite her melancholy. "I suppose they are, though it is strange to think of myself as a grandmother. I am only 40. "Only 40, Nathan teased. "Ancient, practically 1 foot in the grave." Clara swatted him playfully, and he caught her hand, kissing her palm in a gesture so familiar and beloved that Clara's chest ached with love. 22 years since they had met, 12 since they married, and he could still make her heart race with a simple touch. Time continued its relentless march. Hope turned 18 and married Daniel in a ceremony that had the entire town in attendance. She was a beautiful bride, wearing a dress Clara had sewn with painstaking care, her face radiant with joy and hope. Nathan cried openly when he walked her down the aisle, and Clara had to borrow his handkerchief because hers was already soaked. Daniel and Hope moved into a small house near the corrals, close enough to visit often but far enough to have their own space. Hope continued teaching at the school while Daniel worked with Nathan, and Clara watched them building their life together with satisfaction and vicarious joy. James, at 18 now himself, had no interest in marriage yet. He was too focused on the horses and on saving money to start his own breeding operation. He was quieter than his father, more introspective, but he had that same gift for understanding animals. Nathan predicted he would be even better with horses than Nathan himself had been, and Clara believed it. Rose, 16, was still wild and restless, talking about traveling to San Francisco or even back east. She did not want to be tied down, she said. She wanted adventure and excitement, and a bigger life than Goldfield could offer. Clara understood that urge, the desire to be more than circumstances allowed, and she made sure Rose knew she would support whatever path she chose. William, 14, was the surprise. Quiet, bookish William announced one day that he wanted to study law. He wanted to help people, he said, make sure they were treated fairly. Clara immediately thought of her own years of being treated unfairly and powerlessly, and her pride in her youngest son was fierce and overwhelming. She and Nathan began saving to send William to university, something neither of them had ever dreamed would be possible. Clara turned 45, Nathan 49. They were grandparents now, Hope having given birth to a daughter named Grace. Clara held her granddaughter and marveled at the circle of life, at how this tiny person was connected to her and Nathan and all they had built. "She has your eyes," Nathan said, watching Clara cradle the baby. "She has Hope's eyes," Clara corrected. "I am just borrowing them." But she saw what Nathan meant. Grace had that same serious, thoughtful gaze that Clara had seen in the mirror her whole life. She kissed the baby's forehead and silently promised to make sure Grace grew up knowing she was valued and seen, that she could be anything she wanted to be. The mining company continued to thrive, and Clara's investment in it paid off handsomely. She and Nathan had more money now than they had ever dreamed of having, though they lived simply still, their needs modest. They used the money to help others, funding scholarships for students, supporting the church's charity work, helping families who fell on hard times. Clara never forgot what it was like to be poor and powerless. She used her position to make sure others had opportunities she had been denied. When a young woman was widowed and left with children, Clara made sure she got work at the mining company. When a Mexican family faced discrimination, Clara hired the father despite the town's objections and made sure he received fair pay. You are making enemies, Nathan warned her after one particularly contentious hiring decision. I have always had enemies, Clara replied. At least now I have the power to do something good despite them. Nathan just shook his head and kissed her temple. You are magnificent. Have I mentioned that recently? Not in the last hour, Clara said with a smile. You are slipping in your husbandly duties. He made sure to remedy that immediately, and Clara laughed, feeling young and desired and wonderfully alive despite the silver in her hair and the aches in her joints. Growing old with Nathan was a privilege, she thought. Every year together was a gift. On their 15th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party. Hope and Daniel hosted it at their house, and half the town showed up. People Clara had worked with, people Nathan had trained, families they had helped over the years. Even Abigail Preston came, though Emma was not with her. Emma had married a miner 3 years earlier, a love match by all accounts, and moved to Virginia City. Abigail had never quite forgiven Clara for influencing her daughter toward independence, but she had mellowed with age. You have done well for yourselves, Abigail said stiffly, the closest she would ever come to an apology. We have, Clara agreed. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Preston. That night, after the guests had left and the children had gone home, Clara and Nathan sat on their porch in the darkness, holding hands like they had that first night Nathan had taken her to dinner. 15 years, Nathan said. Feels impossible that it has been that long. Feels impossible that it has only been that long, Clara countered. I cannot remember what my life was like before you. Lonely, Nathan said. It was lonely for both of us, but we found each other and everything changed. The town saw what they missed, Clara quoted softly, remembering that first year and all the judgment and hostility they had faced. You told me that once, remember, that the town would see what they missed by dismissing me. I was right, Nathan said with satisfaction. You proved them all wrong, Clara. You showed them exactly what they missed, and now they cannot imagine Goldfield without you. It was true. Clara had become an integral part of the town, someone people relied on and respected. The woman who had been invisible for 12 years was now one of Goldfield's most prominent citizens. It was a transformation that still amazed her sometimes. But the real transformation, the one that mattered most, was internal. Clara had learned that she was valuable, that she was worthy of love, that she had skills and strengths that mattered. Nathan had given her that gift by seeing her when no one else did, by choosing her when everyone said she was not worth choosing. I love you, she told him, the words as necessary as breathing. Today and always. Today and always, Nathan echoed. My Clara. They sat together under the stars, two people who had been forgotten and had found each other, who had built a life from loneliness and love. And Clara thought about the scared, tired woman she had been 15 years ago, measuring flour in a general store and believing her life was over at 30. If she could go back and tell that woman what was coming, tell her that everything she had dreamed of and stopped dreaming of would come true, would that woman have believed her? Probably not. That woman had given up hope. But hope had found her anyway, in the form of a tall cowboy with sage-colored eyes who saw her and chose her and loved her. The town had forgotten Clara Ashford, but they remembered Clara Doyle. And Clara herself had learned that it was never too late, that love could find you in the most unexpected places, that being seen by one person who truly mattered could change everything. She squeezed Nathan's hand and he squeezed back, and in that simple gesture was 15 years of partnership and love and choosing each other every single day. It was, Clara thought, more than enough. It was everything. The desert wind sighed around them, carrying the scent of sage and possibility, and Clara closed her eyes and let herself feel completely, perfectly happy. She was no longer invisible, no longer forgotten. She was loved. She was home. And that was the greatest gift of all.